A lot of songs by Balls.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and KRAMZER. And this week we are talking about ACDC. They got a new album out, just came out on Friday, called Power Up. And we are about to rank all 16 of their studio albums. We're only ranking the US versions or the international releases. We're not doing their first two albums, which were only released in Australia. We are counting the version of High Voltage that was kind of a combination of tracks from their original High Voltage and TNT. But other than that, I think everything else is pretty cut and dry. We're not counting the EPs or the soundtracks. So 16 by our count. So any initial thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, I mentioned in the Oasis video that I thought Oasis was kind of like the ACDC of the 90s because they were kind of just like a hard rock one-trick pony. And I still kind of feel that way. ACDC is nowhere close to being one of my favorite bands. I think they're kind of monotonous. They are kind of a one-trick pony. But even though they're not creative, they stay true to themselves and they don't sell out and they're not pretentious. And like I said, even though they're never going to sniff my favorite bands, I actually was surprised that I enjoyed this a little bit. I think they beat me into submission with just their hard rock, just simplicity. It's kind of charming that they just are who they are. There's a lot of good stuff. Stuff I don't really like. Never is terrible. It's just, the whole discography as a whole doesn't really impress me. I don't like the fact that they never got too creative, but none of it is ever really gets into the cellar. So I'm actually kind of surprised how much I liked it. Didn't love it, not even close to loving it. But, I could put together a good 100-minute playlist of their best tracks and enjoy it. So I'm glad I did this. I went in thinking I was going to hate this. I almost sat it out, if you guys remember. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. They probably, like I said in the text to you guys, they have about 80% of their songs. I don't know how they remember how to play them because they're all kind of the same, just reworked and retooled. But, it is what it is, and I like them. I like them.
They are who I thought they were, and that's fine. Like, I've no problem with AC/DC. Even, my last rated, lowest ranked album, I didn't hate. It was totally a pleasant hard rock experience. I didn't do them in order. Usually I'll just go from first to last in the order of their discography, how they came out. This time I jumped around a little bit because I wanted to not get beaten into submission by kind of the same thing over and over. So I jumped around. I think that helped. And they're a good band. They are who they are. They're never going to be too different, but I think it's amazing how good they can be, kind of skewing to the same track the whole way through. I thought there'd probably be some more clunky albums that I hated, but even their lowest one was fine. So I think they're a pretty good band. I take them for granted a little bit. I kind of even forgot about Back in Black in 1980 when we were doing our top 5, just because it's so ubiquitous. It's just always there. A bunch of really great tracks. I don't know. They're not my favorite band. They're not in my top 50 probably, but I appreciate them. I like them. I think they're a good band, and I think they weathered the death of their lead singer, Bon Scott, about as well as any band could really ever. So props to them. I like them. I like who they are. So yeah, this is a good fun listen for me.
I feel pretty similarly as you guys. The only thing that I would kind of add, Kram talked mostly about how Oasis was a one-trick pony, and kind of agreed with that. But Oasis's one trick was kind of like this pale imitation 90s update of Beatles and Kinks and other kind of classic rock stuff. Whereas I think AC/DC, they are probably the best at their trick. I think if this is what you're looking for and you want this kind of like straight up meat and potatoes hard rock, I mean, I don't know that there's anyone better at it. So I think that's the difference between the Oasis and the AC/DC One Trick Ponies. I think that's kind of night and day.
Better than Oasis, I would say. I like them more than Oasis.
All right, who wants to start?
I can. These bottom five, just pick a card, any card, because they're all about the same. If I was giving them a rating, they'd all get like a 3 stars pretty much. So I kind of went back and forth. I settled on Stiff Upper Lip for my number 16. A little bluesier than I think, Ballbreaker, which was the one before it. There's a pretty big break. I can't remember exactly how many years, but I think it was 5 years between Ballbreaker and Stiff Upper Lip. I just don't know what do you say about an album like this? It's kind of like all the others. I think the production's a little bit better. I think Brian Johnson sounds better. I think that's probably the biggest critique I have is the wild variation in the production and mixing on Brian Johnson's vocals throughout like the 80s and 90s. There's some that are pretty good and others where he just completely unintelligible. So this one was better, but I think the songs just sort of not great for the most part. I don't know. This is my 16th. I don't know why I picked it as my 16th. It's just one that I didn't like the riffs as much as the other one. So it's last.
All right. My number 16 is Ballbreaker, produced by Rick Rubin and Mike Frazier. This is the first one where Phil Rudd comes back into the band. I don't know. It kind of starts with like Flick of the Switch and Fly on the Wall. They kind of start becoming like cartoon versions of themselves a little bit in the 80s, and it leads into the 90s. And I think this is maybe the worst offender of that kind of thing, sort of like the Beavis and Butthead era of the band, and the dirty old man kind of lyrics do not work. I mean, I've got nothing against kind of like raunchy rock lyrics. I'm a Kiss fan, but I don't think Brian Johnson does it very well. I think Bon Scott got away with it a lot better. Tracks like Hard as a Rock, Cover You in Oil, Caught with Your Pants Down. I mean, half the titles alone are just head shakers. I don't know. I don't love it. That's my number 16.
Yeah, I think Joe said his star ratings kind of bottom out at 3 out of 5. I'm with Jason. I'm going Ballbreaker as my number 16, and I would say this is just a straight up bad album. I'd maybe go 1.5 stars out of 5. You know, it's a little too thick and bassy with the sound, and it's really trotting and slow moving. I really like my AC/DC when there's a lot of energy and just has that downhill rock and roll feel to it, and this one's kind of just focused on the attitude and kind of like the power that they think they have, but they don't really, because like what Jason was saying, this kind of feels like a Bon Scott album, one of the early ones where they're just kind of these dirty, sweaty boys, but Johnson doesn't do it as well as him, like Jason said. Well put. You know, they're really trying to do a lot of those raunchy rock and roll motifs. It doesn't work. And then they do some weird stuff like Hail Caesar. What is that about? I don't understand why that song's called that and what comes out of nowhere. You know, like I said in the intro, I liked them a good bit, but these bottom few I didn't really like much. So Ballbreaker, my number 16.
Interesting to note that Ballbreaker was my 16th. I moved it up a couple slots because I just like the guitar sound a little bit better. But yeah, I definitely agree on the lyrics. They're pretty bad. That's why originally I was going to put it at the bottom. My 15 is Rock or Bust, and it's a fine album. This one came out in 2014. Brendan O'Brien produced it, so it sounds good, but I don't know. I just couldn't get into any of the songs. Rock or Bust is all right. Everything else is a little too watered down a little bit. Just nothing too memorable. It just kind of floated by. It's short. It's like 30 minutes long, which you'd think would be a good thing with a band like this, but I just couldn't get into any of the songs. A little too clean. So number 15 for me, Rock or Bust.
That is my number 15 also. I guess it's all right, but like you said, the songs aren't very memorable. I don't really like the production on any of the last 3 Brendan O'Brien produced records. Like you said, a little too clean. And just some of the lyrics again on this record are not good. You're going to close the record with a song called Emission Control. Like, I don't know. I just don't think the songwriting on this record is very good, and the production's not great, and it's not memorable, so not much there.
I actually kind of like the production on some of the newer ones. Not a lot, but I do think it kind of distracts you from the fact that they're the older guys that aren't quite as pure with the raw energy that they want to be. So I have that a little bit later. My 15 is Stiff Upper Lip. I'm pretty close with Joe. It was my 16 at one point, almost interchangeable with Ballbreaker. Like Joe said, but for a different reason, I kind of like the guitar a little bit more on Stiff Upper Lip than Ballbreaker. That's the only reason I'm going with it. This is just, I never liked the title track. I remember hearing that a lot on the radio. I don't like the cadence in his voice in the beginning part before they really start singing. The whole thing is just way too slow. It's like this blues just dredge, really boring for me. I don't think they have the rhythm and the talent to kind of pull that off. If you speed it up and you get that blues hard rock rhythm going, they nail it. But this one's just pretty boring. Hold Me Back is probably my least favorite AC/DC song. It's really static and kind of annoying. Nothing really memorable here. So Stiff Upper Lip, 15, pretty weak for me.
Okie dokie, moving right along. My number 14, another one of their later efforts. I got Black Ice. I enjoyed it a little bit more than the other ones. I think it starts off pretty good with Rock and Roll Train, Skies on Fire, Big Jack, Anything Goes, are all pretty good. And then it sort of just peters out for me, and nothing after that's that memorable. I kind of like the sound. It is, I don't know who produced this one, but Brendan O'Brien again. So it's just slightly better riffs and sounds than Rock or Bust. It's just, it's another 3-star album that's just incrementally better than the two below it for me.
My number 14 is The Razor's Edge. It's got a lot of the same problems that Ballbreaker has. It's just kind of them being caricatures of themselves. The singles are really great and memorable, Thunderstruck, and I've always really liked Money Talks a lot, but other than that, I don't really like anything on this. Mistress for Christmas is maybe the worst AC/DC song, and I don't like the production on it that much. It's got this really slick sheen to it. Bruce Fairbairn produced this one, but not a big fan of it.
You, before we started recording, said you had one big controversial pick. Was that it?
No, my controversial pick is something that I have very high that people would not expect.
Yeah, because I like The Razor's Edge a good bit. We'll be talking about it later with me. I'm with Joe for number 14. I got Black Ice. Kind of one of the worst sounding albums to me. The drums are kind of tinny. It's kind of got like this sticky, flat sound to it on the drums, especially on Skies on Fire. I don't know what's going on that track. Rock and Roll Train is okay. The album's too long, for sure. It's almost an hour. But War Machine's kind of cool, and I like Anything Goes a good bit. So because of those few tracks that I like, 3 songs that I like a good bit versus none on Ballbreaker or Stiff Upper Lip. So, not nearly as bad as those bottom 2, probably like a 2 out of 5 stars, 2.5. But Black Ice, number 14.
All right, here's where Ballbreaker comes in for me. I got a number 13. And I think if you took out all the lyrics, this would be a decent album. I don't know. I like the sound. I don't hate Rick Rubin like Jason does. So once, I listened to it twice, actually, just to make sure, because I had it in last. The second time through, I kind of ignored the lameness of the lyrics a little bit, concentrated more on the sound, the guitars. I think there's some decent songs. I think The Honey Roll sounds good. Burning Alive sounds good. Boogeyman sounds good. Even The Fuhrer sounds good. It is too juvenile. I agree with what you guys said. Bon Scott could get away with this kind of stuff because it was 20 years before, and they were precocious 20-somethings, but now they're like 40s. It's so much. That being said, I think it sounds good. I like the music part of it. That's why it's all the way up at 13 for me.
My number 13 is Power Up, the new one that just came out on Friday. I like the first 2 tracks a lot, Realize and Rejection, and then after that, nothing else really did much for me. Again, I don't like the Brendan O'Brien production that much. And I heard a lot of people talking about this record saying how great Brian Johnson sounds on it, how he sounds rejuvenated, and I just don't hear it. I mean, he's singing higher than he was on the past few records, but there's like something fishy going on with the sound of it. It's got a really synthetic sound. I don't know if it's auto-tune or what's happening, or if it's just like layered in a weird way, but it sounds kind of fake and artificial to me, and it kind of kills the record in a way for me.
Yeah, I kind of heard the same, especially regarding his vocals. I don't think he's sounded bad really the last 10, 15 years, but I think it's better when he's aware of what he can do. I didn't see the fascination with the vocals on that either. My number 13 is going to be Flick of the Switch. Kind of a mistake getting rid of Mutt Lange at this point, I thought. This is the first one they did without him after 3 albums. Produced it themselves. That was probably also a problem. They felt like they had to get back to basics, which they kind of do, but the result is kind of just like this really weak album. It needs a producer. It needs some guidance on it. You know, they have kind of like that raw guitar kind of motif going on, but the songwriting's not as good. And that said, it's hard for me to kind of pinpoint the recipe in the stew that makes a decent AC/DC song a great AC/DC song, but you know it when you hear it. And this one doesn't really have a lot of great AC/DC songs, kind of none. I don't mind This House is on Fire and Guns for Hire, but none of them are nearly as good as other AC/DC songs that I really like. Kind of missing attitude in the mix. I don't know if it's just like too stripped down, but it just seems really quiet and weak and lacks the power, especially that was on the Mutt Lange stuff, Highway to Hell, and through the next couple albums. So, you know, I don't understand why they did this, but it's still, because it's kind of got that back to basics kind of root hard rock songwriting, it's not really bad. It just, I think it was a mistake. Probably it would be at least a half star, maybe a full star better if they had a good producer on it, but I think it really lacks good production. So Flick of the Switch, number 13 for me.
Very interesting. For me, I have number 12 is going to be Fly on the Wall. And I think this should be much higher because I think the songs on here are all pretty good. They sort of change up the sound a little bit. I think a little more sort of 80s metal, a little less of sort of the real cut and dry blues, hard rock that they were doing before. Kind of update the sound a little bit, but the vocals are so bad. Like the mix of them on something like Fly on the Wall, you cannot hear Brian Johnson at all what he's saying, which maybe that's not actually the worst thing in the world, but it's just, it sounds like he's in like another room recording, and like just, it does not work at all. This was a self-produced one as well, but I think it sounds much worse than Flick of the Switch. The songs are good. Shake Your Foundations and First Blood, Playing with Girls are all pretty good songs, but the production kills it for me. So this is a wasted opportunity, I think. So number 12, Fly on the Wall.
Okay, my number 12 is going to be Black Ice. I don't know, it's still got the same problems that the other two Brendan O'Brien records have, but I like the sound of this one a little bit more. It's really, really bright sounding, but it's too long and not enough good songs to justify being that long. My favorite track on it, probably Rock and Roll Dream, but not a ton on there that's that good. So it's a sort of forgettable and just another sort of mediocre late period record by AC/DC.
My number 12, this is kind of going to be the point where, you know, I think 16, 15, 14, 13, bad to lousy albums. This one's decent, and it's a little more creative than their other stuff. I'm going to go with Blow Up Your Video, which I had a lot higher. I had it fluttering around number 9 or 8 for a bit. Then I kind of realized it's really just because of the first 3 tracks. I kind of think it goes off a cliff after that, after Heat Seeker, That's the Way I Want to Rock and Roll, and Mean Streak. But there is kind of like this old 50s kind of vibe to it on some of the songs that they did a little bit on the first couple albums. It is kind of a shinier sound. And with that, I think Johnson sounds pretty good on this. A little more melodic kind of stuff to it. For them, this is all in, you know, the realm of AC/DC. So when I talk about these big changes, you know, it's barely these big changes. But, you know, it's those 3 songs were good. The rest of the album isn't nearly as memorable, but Pretty cool. I do really like Mean Streak. Didn't make my top 10 songs, but it was thinking about it because it's kind of got this boogie rock ZZ Top kind of feel, which I like. So even just like changing it up a little bit was like intriguing to me. And but yeah, a little bit repetitive and clunky after that. So couldn't really climb higher than that. Number 12, Blow Up Your Video.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's why it's my number 11. First 3 songs are pretty darn good, and then everything after that is pretty generic. I don't remember anything about them, so that's sort of a typical AC/DC thing for some of these lower ranked albums. They seem to start out pretty good, and then maybe it's just because like 25 minutes of kind of the same thing over and over can wear you out. But I usually like the first first 4 songs of an album, and this is no exception. I think it sounds better than Fly on the Wall. It's fine. It's good. That's it. That's all I got.
My number 11 is Flick of the Switch, and I pretty much agree exactly with what Kram said about it. The first time I went through the discography, I had a little break between For Those About to Rock and when I listened to Flick of the Switch, but then just kind of going back through a little bit and going straight from one to the other. Flick of the Switch, after listening to Back in Black and For Those About to Rock, Flick of the Switch suddenly sounds like a lo-fi record or something. It's like really, really drastically different. And I agree, it was probably a mistake. I mean, they were on this kind of roll with Mutt Lange, and this kind of shot them in the foot a bit. But I don't think it's a bad record. I like Deep in the Hole a lot. I just don't think it's that memorable of a record, but I think it's pretty good overall.
All right, my number 11, this is almost interchangeable with the one they did before this. I've got the newest one, Power Up. It almost seems like Rock or Bust 2 to me, even though they're 6 years apart. Like Jason said, and we talked about, the vocals, he's reaching maybe a little bit, and they don't sound as good as I heard they would. Not that you're listening to AC/DC for the vocals. They don't really distract, but there are some good songs on here. I like Realize a good bit. I love when they do that demonic rugby team choir chorus kind of thing. It works. I don't think it's, the songs are as catchy, and it's not quite as rocking as Rock or Bust. And again, I'm going to probably say this over and over. What is the secret ingredient that elevates some of their songs from really good from just a generic song? I can't really tell because they are still very close, but this one doesn't have quite as much. I do like their really good riff on Demon Fire. Systems Down is kind of cool, but Rock or Bust will be my next one, and I like that a decent bit. So number 11, Power Up.
Number 10, Power Up. Yeah, KRAMZER pretty much nails it. Realize is really good. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, this could be just a totally rejuvenated back, at the top AC/DC. It's good. It's in the top 10, so I obviously enjoyed it. But again, it's sort of like the first 4 songs, and then it sort of starts to slowly go downhill as it sort of hits you over the head with the same thing, just over and over. I was hoping for maybe a little bit different. They brought in Stevie Young after Malcolm Young died in 2018, I think. So there's a slightly different lineup, but it's still Brendan O'Brien producing, so it's pretty much going to sound like all the other ones. But that being said, just solid, boogie, blues, rock, hard rock, and that's just what you're going to get from AC/DC. It's good. It's 3.5 stars. That's my review.
My number 10 is Fly on the Wall. The Flick of the Switch was credited, production was credited to the band. On this record, it's credited to Malcolm and Angus Young. I do think it sounds a lot better than Flick of the Switch, and it's maybe one of their weirdest records. They do some kind of different things on this. I like the track Danger. I really like the sound of the kick and the bass on this record. It sounds really tight and punchy, but it's the mid 80s and there's a ton of reverb on the snare, and it just overtakes the entire record. This is close to being a really good, interesting AC/DC record. Falls just a little short with a couple little production tweaks. Like Joe said, the vocals are a little off, and then that snare is just out of control, but This is like getting there, and it's one of their more interesting records.
All right, my number 10 is Rock or Bust. Better than Power Up. I think Johnson sounds pretty good, pretty darn good on this album, but he's working within the window that he should. He's reined in, not doing anything out of his element, and it works for me. You know, it's just a simple rock record. Play Ball, really good. Dogs of War is cool. You know, not really a weak link in the chain. I think there's a couple songs on Power Up that really drag it down, especially when it's a little slower. So this one, I think, keeps your interest and your blood pumping a little bit better. That's why it edges it out for the number 10 spot, Rock or Bust.
For me, at number 9, I got a Flick of the Switch, and you know, it's not way up there on my list, but I liked it a lot more than you guys did. I kind of like the back to basics, stripped down. Title track's good. Never Shakedown's real good. Bedlam in Belgium, I like it a good bit. They're kind of sick of Mutt Lange's perfectionism, so they were like, let's get rid of that guy. And probably a mistake. I don't know. I kind of like the throwbackness. The sheen kind of comes off a little bit. You know, with a Mutt Lange album, it's almost hard not to like think of Mutt Lange instead of the band. He almost takes over sometimes. So I think this shows that they can still rock even without a top-notch producer. It's only 35 minutes long, so it's probably like the exact right length for an AC/DC album. And I think it's pretty good. So.
All right, my number 9 is Blow Up Your Video. I think Cram pretty much nailed it with his assessment of this record as well. They bring back Harry Vanda and George Young, who I believe produced Powerage way back in the day. I think the singles on this record are really good. I think it sounds decent for a late 80s record. And like you said, it kind of tails off a little at the end. But yeah, I think those hits kind of carry it. And I think it definitely sounds better than their previous 2 records. So I think it's a solid effort, maybe a little underrated.
My number 9, this will probably upset those from Down Under and some AC/DC purists, but I'm going with Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap. These early AC/DC records almost feel like they're more of like a Bon Scott record with the band behind them, which I like. I like Bon Scott a good bit. I like his style. I think this one is a little bit overly ambitious. Some of the songs are way too long for AC/DC songs. Some of them aren't really well thought out, and it kind of lacks a lot of rhythm to it. But you still really got a lot of their good flavor and, you know, youth and soulfulness, that just sweaty, dirty, you know, rock and roll boys kind of attitude. They haven't really nailed that AC/DC formula prowess yet. And I just think there's a lot of songs on here that are just a little bit of filler. I mean, I love Dirty Deeds. I like there's going to be some rockin', but was never a big fan of Big Balls. A little too goofy for me. And I just think it just lacks a lot of just like the musicality that the other Bon Scott era albums have. There is some cool stuff, no doubt, but I think it is a bit overrated for them. I like the style, the punkiness style of it, but doesn't do it for me as much as the other Bon Scott stuff.
I think that's totally reasonable take, KRAMZER. For me, I have at number 8, Razor's Edge, which I think it was a nice return to form in 90 for them. You know, Thunderstruck, obviously, great, you know, killer intro, very memorable. Money Talks was their highest charting American single, which I thought was interesting that they could do that in 1990. It's pretty impressive. I kind of like Mistress for Christmas. I don't know what Jason's talking about. I think the first half of the album is fantastic. And then sort of like most AC/DC records so far, the second half peters out a little bit. Just nothing really memorable, especially after something, you know, as good as Thunderstruck to start the album. I was hoping there'd be a little something extra from Angus after that, but it's sort of, that's kind of the peak, and it kind of goes downhill from there a little bit. But I think it's a pretty solid album, very good for, you know, their third decade in, and I think it sounds good. I think it sounds better than Blow Up Your Video or any of their 80s stuff, fading back to Mutt Lange, of course. So, a good album. It was in my top 10 for 1990.
All right, mine number 8 is For Those About to Rock. The last one produced by Mutt Lange. I don't know it's like almost a good record, but it's trying a little too hard, I think, to replicate Back in Black. I think some of the production is getting a little too overblown. The snare drum's starting to sound really big and loud. And I just don't think the songwriting is anywhere close to Back in Black. I think the title track might be my least favorite of their sort of like radio staples that you hear all the time. It doesn't really do anything for me. It's okay. It's a pretty decent record, but I think it's a huge drop off in quality from Back in Black. I Put the Finger on You and Let's Get It Up, Breaking the Rules. Those are all pretty decent tracks. The rest of it's pretty forgettable.
I'm with Jason as my number 8 being For Those About to Rock. It's a significant drop off from Back in Black, but 8 and on up are albums that I think are pretty good, and I would reach for this album again. I'll go at least 3 out of 5 stars on this. Yeah, I agree with all you're saying, but it does more for me. It's kind of diet Back in Black, no doubt. I don't really have any problems with the production. I mean, it's right in the title that it's going to be, and there's a cannon on the cover, for God's sake, so you know it's going to be a pretty bombastic album to begin with. I like the title track a lot. I Put the Finger on You, Let's Get It Up. I think Snowballed is really underrated. Breaking the Rules, like Jason said, is really good. The rest is a little bit of filler. I think the biggest problem I have with it compared to Back in Black is it's not nearly as fun. Like there's a lot of just underappreciated fun on Back in Black. You really have a good time singing along with a lot of it. There's a lot of songs that even Girls Love Shook Me All Night Long and stuff like that. Jason hates this word, but Back in Black's a little more danceable at times. And this one really isn't. It's got a little bit more hard rock, AC/DC, never close to poppy sounding, but the songwriting is more poppy and catchy on Back in Black at times. But I do think this is a pretty good album, so I would reach for it again, and it is my number 8.
All right, I'm dipping back to the Bon Scott era for the first time. Number 7, I got Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, and I like this album. I think the title track's great. I think Rocker, Problem Child, all strong, but I don't know. The rest of it's sort of middle of the road. I think it's not quite as good as the other Bon Scott ones. And that's about it. That's all I really think. I think Rocker's pretty great. It's like a sort of 50s throwback. And I like when they do that. I wish they would do a little more. It's another one. First half of the album's great. And then side 2 is just sort of the same thing, less interesting. And all the songs are the last 3 songs are 7, 6, and 5 minutes. So I like the sort of get her done quick 3 minutes, sort of almost punky 50s feel of the first half. Second half not quite as memorable, so that's why it's number 7 for me.
Number 7. Also for me, the first time going back into the Bon Scott era, really didn't realize until doing this how much more I like Bon Scott than Brian Johnson. I've got all 5 of the Bon Scott albums in my top 7, but my least favorite of those is Let There Be Rock. I think this is kind of like the first time that they really streamline into that signature AC/DC sound. I think the first 2 records are a little more all over the place. This is just straight ahead the whole way through, but I just don't think the songs are that memorable or catchy or interesting. I think probably Whole Lotta Rosie, the album closer, is the best track on it. But other than that, it's a little bit too simple for me. It's just all just like straight up, straightforward, nothing fancy. A lot of the humor from the first 2 records are missing. So I don't know. I like it a lot, but compared to the other Bon Scott records, it's by far my least favorite.
Wow. Bold move. This is the album that a lot of people consider, or at least, people that don't pick Back in Black, a lot of them say this is the definitive AC/DC record, like you said, where they found their footing and all of that. But I agree. I think it's really overrated. That's why I also have it at number 7. But I do like it. Just, like Jason said, it kind of, has like that official AC/DC sound by now, like bookmarks it. But yeah, Bon Scott's lost a little bit in the shuffle, and the songwriting just doesn't really blow me away. I do like kind of the idea of the album with like that, conquering rock and roll, early Testament, biblical kind of vibe to it. I like Bad Boy Boogie a good bit. Whole Lotta Rosie is cool. Let There Be Rock is great, but I don't know what I'm missing where a lot of people say this is maybe the best AC/DC album. It might just be that I like a lot of the other Bon Scott stuff more. But yeah, this one I found a little bit overrated and was pretty surprised at how highly regarded it is among a lot of AC/DC faithful. But I did like it. I don't want to undersell it. I just think, yeah, a little overrated. Like Jason said, just a little bit too basic 70s rock for even AC/DC. Yeah, number 7, Let There Be Rock.
I kind of agree with you guys. It's my number 6. It's maybe a little too simple. There's no window dressing on here. You know, sort of the first 2 albums, you kind of have that humor from Bon Scott that came through. A lot of songs about balls. This one kind of pushes that aside and just like gets down to just rocking really hard. I think Dog Eat Dog is great. Go Down. I think Angus really has his first like really memorable solos on this album. It's good. It's really, I think you guys were right when you said it's sort of like, this is how AC/DC sounds. Like this is their sound. This is their streamlined AC/DC-ness from here on out. This is sort of how it's going to go. But, you know, it's top 6 for me, so I like it a lot. And, but yeah, I did find it odd that like the reception for this one is really high for some reason, because I don't think it's as good as their next 4 or their first one. So this is sort of around this period, maybe the week. This and Dirty Deeds are sort of on par for kind of a little slightly less than the other ones.
My number 6, going back to the Bon Scott years, I've got the debut, or the American debut at least, High Voltage. Rolling Stone called it an all-time low for the rock genre. It's definitely not that. I think it's really kind of a cool record, very raw, not quite as muscular sounding as their future albums, especially the way the drums are recorded, kind of small sounding, almost like home recorded in a way. But I think it's really, really cool record for that reason. I love a lot of the tracks on it. The Jack, Can I Sit Next to You Girl, TNT, all kinds of great songs on it. I think it's really fun, and, you know, Bon, you know, really puts his personality out there a lot on these first couple records, which I enjoy a lot.
Good call. My number 6 is going to be an album that I think I probably have higher than just about anybody, and that's going to be Fly on the Wall. Everything you guys described it as is true. I just really think it's cool, and I appreciate the fact that it sticks out like a sore thumb among their catalog to me. It is kind of creative and kind of weird and a really conscious effort to do something different. I never really mind the reverb in just about anything, so it doesn't bother me at all. Give me that echo. They can't really decide if they're going like thrash metal or hair metal kind of, because it's really pretty sounding at times. Some of the guitar tones on here almost sound like Van Halen when he's just doing like these pretty chords off of like a Hagar record. So it's like really bright, but Shake Your Foundations has some really cool guitar riffing on it. You know, Danger is the weirdest song in their catalog, but it's awesome. Sink the Pink, Hell or High Water are all awesome. All of those were really close to getting in my top 10 songs. So I, without a doubt, found this to be the most interesting album in the catalog. And I liked it a good bit. It's like their 80s metal album. And it's cool. I almost had it at number 5, but there's some standouts at number 5 that edged it out. And I probably would have taken a lot of heat for having Fly on the Wall in a top 5 AC/DC catalog. So it's just at number 6. But this was my pleasant surprise, because I'd never listened to this album. You never hear any of this on the radio. You never even really hear this album talked about at all. So it just like came out of nowhere. And I really liked it. And this may be the album that, what I was alluding to, made me like AC/DC a little more than I was anticipating as a whole. So I was really impressed. I dug it. Fly on the Wall, number 6.
Wow, KRAMZER, you kind of made me want to redo my whole list now that I think about it. I was a coward to put it as low as I did, because it's very interesting. If it just was mixed a little bit better, I'd have it way up there, really. But talking about what I do have up here, I got number 5, High Voltage. Like Jason said, it's just a cool, fun, hard rockin' album. I'm trying to think like when this came out, nothing else sounded like this in 1976. So it's interesting that it got such bad reviews. It was, it didn't even come out, whatever they mishmashed up into the American version of High Voltage is really great. I think It's a Long Way to the Top, If You Want to Rock and Roll, is one of the all-time great sort of songs about rock and roll. The idea to add bagpipes is just genius. Probably needs to be more bagpipes in rock and roll songs. And the lyrics are a lot, I think, more clever than people want to admit or lead on. And this is sort of Bon Scott at his sort of most playful. And I think it really works. And it's a really good sort of lo-fi sounding hard rock, just something that really had never been done like this before. And it's a really good album.
In the same vein, my number 5 is Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. I think this is possibly the most musically varied record in their catalog. You've got like really slow bluesy tunes. You've also got Rocker, which is like a blistering fast tune. You've got the kind of humor on Big Balls, which I think Bon kind of gets away with. That's a good example of like something that he can do that Brian Johnson absolutely could not get away with. There's like barroom boogie tunes, like there's going to be some rockin'. So, I mean, it's all still within that AC/DC sort of limitation, but I think it is pretty varied and kind of cool and kind of different, and kind of the last record that's like that, because with Let There Be Rock, they kind of snap into that formula that they sort of stick with through the rest of the career. So I like it. I think a lot of the songs are really good and memorable and just fun, and I like it a lot.
All right, my number 5, just edging out Fly on the Wall, is an album I'm surprised especially Joe didn't have close to the top 5, and that's The Razor's Edge. Maybe their least bluesy album. Like, this is kind of just a little bit more interesting, like stadium hard rock. I don't really know how quite to describe it. The first half of this album, except for Mistress for Christmas with Jason, is really good. Thunderstruck, Fire Your Guns, Money Talks, Razor's Edge, Rock Your Heart Out. Awesome. If the second half was nearly as good as that, it'd be higher. The second half still has some good stuff on it. Shot of Love and Let's Make It I like the most on the second half. Obviously, Thunderstruck and Money Talks get a ton of airplay, and rightfully so. I think they're great. To me, the hidden gem on here is The Razor's Edge. It's almost like got almost the closest to like prog they get a little bit, with like the construction and composition of the guitar part. That said, I mean, I'm not out here saying that they're going to join King Crimson in any second, but that's as close as they get. They're a little bit out of their element as far as the songwriting here. Not out of their element, but out of their comfort zone, the songwriting, which I kind of like. And to me, the biggest difference on this album is Chris Slade on drums. You can hear the difference 5 minutes into this. Some of the best drum moments, AC/DC, are all over this album. Fire Your Guns starts with like a nice little hi-hat part, for God's sakes. You never hear that with Phil Rudd, probably. He admittingly says, I just do the same thing over and over, but no other drummer has the guts to do that, which, you know, it is what it is. But I thought that the drumming was finally kind of noticeable here. It's rarely on AC/DC that you're like, oh, the drums, or oh, the bass. But you do get a little bit of that on this album. And for the first half alone, the strength of that, I think it's a really good record. And I think it sounds really good too. One of the better sounding late period records for them. So, or later periods. So The Razor's Edge, rounding out my top 5 at number 5.
My number 4, for those about to rock, We Salute You. I was surprised you guys had it as low as you did. I like the title track. I like the big guns, the explosions. I think it's a very catchy verse. And really, for the first time on an AC/DC album, I think side 2 is much better than side 1. Especially the last 3 songs, Breaking the Rules, Night of the Long Knives, and Spellbound, are all sort of not the typical AC/DC songs. But it's just kind of have a different sort of less blues-based kind of sound to them, especially Spellbound, which I really like. Obviously, it pales in comparison to Back in Black. It doesn't have like those 5 just standout singles. But I was kind of surprised. I know I've heard this album before, but probably not for a really long time, because I just don't kind of pick up and listen to AC/DC albums much. But I really like this one more than I thought I would, even if it is sort of, you know, similar, same production style pretty much with Mutt Lange. But I thought it was a little more interesting and a little more varied than Back in Black. and certainly a lot more polished than sort of their 80s stuff. But I liked it. I think it's a good album. Number 4.
So I think my list is fairly traditional, except for my number 4. I knew I would like this album more than you guys. I didn't know how much more. My number 4 is Stiff Upper Lip. And I love this record. I think it's great. I think it's easily the second best Brian Johnson record. His voice is lower on this record, and I think it's really cool. It's mixed, kind of muddy in a way, too, and I also think that works. It's slower, it's bluesier. I just like all the songs a lot. I think it's some of their best writing. Safe in New York City, Can't Stand Still, Satellite Blues are all great. I don't think there's any weak tracks on it, really. I like this whole record start to finish. Really solid, and I know I'm in a minority, but I really like Stiff Upper Lip a lot.
Boo. What were you listening to? Did someone switch out and just label a different record with this album? I mean, I am trying to be as nice to AC/DC as I can, and it's genuine, but that album is bad. But I love you, buddy.
I think, especially coming out of the records that it comes after, these sort of like hyper stylized, like almost cartoonish version of the band, it just comes back down to the earth a little on Stiff Upper Lip. It's kind of raw and just no nonsense blues rock, and I think it's cool.
Okay. All right. Number 4, right? Number 4 for me is going to be High Voltage. I liked this a lot. I never listened to it before, even all the way through, even though I know a bunch of the songs. Yeah, I don't get why this... Actually, I kind of get why this album was kind of dismissed. You know, I think critics in the mid-'70s wanted their rock and roll to have that warm rock singer-songwriter sound, or at least have like some sex appeal to it, you know, with some good rhythm and stuff like that, like Zeppelin or the Stones or Aerosmith or something like that. This doesn't. It's really dirty and grimy and sweaty and gross kind of. And it kind of like lo-fi and grungy in a way compared to everything else that was going on with it. You know, maybe like almost like one of the first just like garage bands that got really powerful, just doing power chords and just straight up rock and roll. But I like it a lot. I think it's got a lot more just enjoyable music than Dirty Deeds does. It's a long way to the top is great rock and roll singer. Pretty much everything on here I like, except She's Got Balls. I think the hidden gem on here is Little Lover. I don't think they do slow songs well, kind of ever, but I think this one is the best one. They don't have a lot of ballads. I don't think they have anything with acoustic guitar. So this is one of the more softer ballady songs that they do, or probably the most one in it, and it works. It's good. Best song in the album is Can I Sit Next to You, Girl? It's my number 11. I couldn't get it in the top 10 for my songs list, but I really dug it. I got no problems with this record, really, except for the fact that I don't straight up love it, but I got no criticisms. I think it's pretty good. High Voltage, number 4.
All right, we're in the top 3 now, and I think these 3, and I think we all have the same 3. Yeah. Wow, that is amazing. So let's see if they all line up. I went back and forth on this one, 2 and 3. I think they're both outstanding, but for number 3, number 3 is going to be Highway to Hell, and I think it's great. It's interesting. It's you know, Mutt Lange came on to do this one, and he kind of stripped down some of the distortion. You think like a song like Highway to Hell would be like huge, massive distortion all over the place, but it's almost no distortion. It's just really loud amps turned up, and it's interesting to compare the two. And I've listened to them back to back because Back in Black is so kind of big and loud and just like expansive, and this one's a little stripped back, a little more kind of towards, you know, High Voltage. Great tracks. Highway to Hell, one of the all-time greats. Girls Got Rhythms, great. Touch Too Much, Beating Around the Bush. I think Love Hungry Man's pretty good. Night Prowler's pretty good. I think pretty much every song on here is pretty dang good. It's just, I'll talk about Powerage next because it's Back in Black's number 1. Let's be honest with ourselves. It's just a really good album. I think Bon Scott sounds great. I think the guitars sound great, but it's just not quite as good as the top 2. It's close. I think all 3 of these are amazing, but number 3, Highway to Hell for me.
My number 3 is Highway to Hell. I agree. Mutt Lange comes in. It's a more polished sounding record. The writing is tighter. There's a lot of really good songs on it. I read a lot about sort of Mutt Lange, what he was doing with the band, and he sort of basically taught Bon Scott how to sing properly and how to take breaths in the right spots. And he would have Angus record next to him so he could sort of guide him through his solos. And I mean, you can really tell it's just another level of sort of, professionalism within the band. And I think it sounds great. I think Mutt Lange is an amazing producer. Obviously, we've talked about him on the channel before, my love for Heartbeat City. And yeah, I know a lot. We talk a lot about production on this channel. And usually when we talk about production, we're talking about the way things sound. But I think he does a lot in terms of the construction of the songs and just making sure the parts all fit together the right way. And I think the first record that he does with AC/DC is sort of, starting to teach them certain things. And I think it really comes to fruition on the next one where it goes to a whole nother level. But I think it's great and a really good step forward for the band.
Really well said. Yeah, eventually we'll do some sort of list where we count down our favorite producers and stuff like that, and he's got to be among the top. So yeah, we've got the same top three. As much as I would love to get them all in the same order, I have Powerage at number 3. It's awesome. This was my hidden gems all over this album. You don't hear any of this stuff on the radio really, and that's a damn shame because it's just awesome. Bit more rhythm and just tighter than Let There Be Rock. I think this is the best. I agree with everything Jason said about Mutt Lange coming in and kind of perfecting all of that. But for the pre-Mutt Lange stuff, I think Powerage is the best sounding and the tightest of the Bon Scott era before Lange came in. They're most polished. I got kind of this Rolling Stones vibe listening to it with some of the songs, and then I read that this is Keith Richards' favorite AC/DC album, which I thought was cool and made me feel kind of confident about my ideas. But it's got a nicer blend of just a lot more rhythm and blues than the first stuff. It's not just straight up hard rock. I think this is where Angus really kind of finds his personal footing with his riffs and some of his solos. And a lot of the songs just kind of breathe a little more, like Gone Shootin' I really love. And there's no way you would have heard that just kind of like slower, more delicate introduction with the guitar in and out on the first few albums. Up to My Neck and You is awesome. Give Me a Bullet is really good. There's not a bad song on here. And this was a pleasant surprise. I would be happy to listen to this again. Like I said, they kind of beat me into submission listening to all of these over the last week, to the point where like all I kind of want right now is just like hard rock. Like I've even listened to like the Hold Steady a little bit and Thin Lizzy a little bit in my downtime from listening to this lately, just to keep it going. So this was a really nice, pleasant surprise. Next to Fly on the Wall, objectively better than Fly on the Wall, but those two albums are really the ones that I just didn't really know about and really, really dug. I'd go as high as 3.5, 4 stars out of this possibly. Nah, 3.5, because as high as I'd go for my top 2 would be 4 out of 5. So 3.5, I dug it. Powerage by AC/DC number 3.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything KRAMZER said, except it's a 4.5 star effort. I think this album just totally kicks ass. Down Payment Blues, I think is what you were referring to, KRAMZER, is the one that sounds like almost a Rolling Stones sound, which totally kind of catches you off guard because it's really the first time that they get that far into the blues and that kind of sound on it. It's a little darker. Most of the humor kind of is gone. Give Me a Bullet and Gone Shootin'. It's not quite the puckish sort of juvenile-ness that we saw from AC/DC before this, but the solos, I think Angus takes it to a whole nother level on Sin City, Down Payment Blues, and Riff Raff are just awesome. The riffs are incredible. It's just so tight. Jason mentioned that sort of after this Mutt Lange came in and sort of refined the band a little bit, but this is my second favorite, so it would be interesting kind of see where they would have gone without Mutt Lange. He definitely changed their style significantly. So I was kind of interested to see what they would have done if they had, kept with Harry Vanda and George Young. But we wouldn't have gotten Back in Black, so I guess it was all for the best. But this one, it's interesting that we all had in our top three, because it didn't, the reviews of this one, you almost never hear it mentioned ever. So I don't know what we heard that sort of separates it, but I think we were all on the right track with this.
Yeah, it's my number 2 also. This is, so it's not as polished or like, refined as the records following it with Mutt Lange, but I forget, earlier in the video, Cram was talking about how he likes his AC/DC, like that downhill sort of forward momentum, and that is the best way to describe this record. It's fast, and it just has this forward momentum to it. It is in your face, and it's awesome, and I think a huge part of that is Cliff Williams entering the band on this record. I think he's a very underrated bass player. He really just pushes the songs along. I wouldn't call Mark Evans a bad bass player, and I think they would have been fine if he stayed in the band, but I think there is a little, of an uptick adding Cliff Williams to the mix. You just get a little more groove with him, a little bit more of a tighter pocket, and like I said, the songs just push, and they're like really, really, kind of in your face. Rock and Roll Damnation's awesome. I love What's Next to the Moon. Up to My Neck and You is really cool. A lot of good songs. It's just an awesome rock record. It's great.
Yeah, it's a really good rock record, and I'll defend my 3.5 out of 5. We're talking about my all-time albums. I mean, even though I think it's a great AC/DC album, to me, they're still just kind of a little bit not very creative meat and potatoes rock band, which I like other bands that do that more than AC/DC. But, in my life, reaching for an album that I think is 3.5 out of 5 is still a good way to spend 40 minutes for me. So no, let's not rain on any parades. No raining, Joe. Anyway, my number 2 is going to be Highway to Hell. The first Mutt Lange record. You can hear the difference. The reason why it's beating out Powerage for me is, one, it's literally one more song that I really, really like than has Powerage, and 2, I think this is their best lyrical album. It's got this nice blend of just like classic lusty rock and roll lyrics with a little bit of doom kind of put in. I think it's like the perfect Bon Scott as a singer and as a, with the lyrics kind of record. But then, you just got a lot of just awesome, gritty guitar riff and attitude. I think it steps that Angus took with his guitar leads, and Powerage, he even ups it on here. Title track's great. Girls Got Rhythm is awesome. Pretty much every song on here I really, really like, except maybe Night Prowler, a bit too long, maybe a little clunky as a closer for me. Love Hungry Man is awesome. And Mutt Lange, one of the masters of just like those collective chorus choir sounds that he does on almost everything he touches. And, it sounds like this pump up chant before a rugby game that they're all doing, like just that sound. He just nails it all the time, and I think it's just got a lot of attitude and just narrowly better than Powerage, but not close to the winner, which we have a trifecta here with AC/DC. What is it, Joe?
It is Back in Black. Just sort of a miracle of an album, really, if you think about how it came about, and losing your lead singer who had sort of started taking you up the charts. They kept the same producer, but it sounds a lot different than Highway to Hell. I think it's so much bigger. It's sort of like the peak of hedonism and just rock and roll. Boys will be boys. This is sort of, it. This is the pinnacle. And it's just loaded with amazing riffs, amazing solos. The lyrics are what do you expect from an AC/DC album? But you're not here for the lyrics. You're here for the rock, the guitars. It's more dynamic, I think, than any of their other albums. Hell's Bells and Shoot to Thrill, Back in Black, a whole nother level. It's hard to explain. I mean, you really have to listen to all of their albums, and then this one is just sort of, like I said before, it's ubiquitous. And you take it for granted. It's just a monster of rock and roll. Everybody sounds great. Brian Johnson steps right in. You barely even notice that it's obviously a different singer, but it just feels completely natural. Like he just stepped in, like he's, been there for years, and you just never miss a beat. So it's just a great album. They never sound as good is this again? I don't know. People, 25 million records. It's the 6th highest selling album in U.S. chart history. So I don't know. Everyone likes it. I'm not saying anything that millions of people don't already know. But Back in Black, it's a great album and a trifecta at number 1.
So often on this channel that I kind of demote records for being overplayed. And this is a super overplayed record, and I probably don't need to hear half of the songs again, but it is just undeniably just like a perfectly made rock record. Mutt Lange, I think, down to a molecular level, these songs are like put together perfectly, just great production. And I think there's a lot of things, especially like the way the parts lead into each other, and like a pre-chorus will just launch into a chorus, or there's like in Shoot to Thrill, there's that sort of that weird kind of un-AC/DC chord, that E7 sharp 9 that launches into the chorus. It's just, I don't know, maybe Angus wrote that or Malcolm wrote that, but it feels like something that Mutt Lange would have had them do. And there's just tons of things like that throughout this record that make the songs just hit so hard and just make them undeniable. They're just so infectious and catchy and just, they rock. So I mean, yeah, I couldn't demote it for being overplayed because it deserves the number 1 spot.
Yeah, Mutt Lange is the MVP of this album, and the greatest pinch hit of all time, Brian Johnson coming in, and he sounds good on this album. And I don't know if I agree with Joe. I mean, obviously I'm not here for the lyrics, but I think this one has more sing-along ability than just about every other AC/DC album. And I think a lot of the songs are fun, like Shoot to Thrill and You Shook Me All Night Long. Back in Black is pretty funky and danceable. Like, it's really tight, the way the guitar's riffing in the pocket and out of the drums. And yeah, all these little touches that you can probably discover some new ones. To me, the thing that makes You Shook Me All Night Long so great is, I think it's the 3rd verse when the second guitar part comes in and it's just double layered, but it just elevates the song. Like, in a moment you get really into it, and it's great. All the touches that Mutt Lange did are perfect. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say. It's got a lot of good groove, just good, hard, muscular blues rock. Kind of surprised Jason picked it. I figured he swims upstream so often, I didn't think we were likely to get it. And like he said, I think the overplayedness of so many of the big hits probably were going to kill it. I thought you were probably going to go Highway to Hell before we started recording, but it seemed the more we were talking about the way things were going. But glad to see it. I think this was an easy winner. And for the star scale, I will go a healthy 4.5 out of 5 for this one. So it's a really, really good rock record.
All right, everybody, let us know what you think down below. Leave your lists. Let us know what you think of ours. Be sure to hit like if you like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already yet. Hit the bell for notifications and check the description for links to our social media accounts. We'll let you know what's coming up on the channel on there. You can head over to the community tab on our page. We got polls that you can vote in for upcoming episodes. Lots of stuff going on. We got top 10 songs coming tomorrow, and we will see you then.